Everywhere else we've lived, when it's time for Christmas break, the students always get 2 full weeks off, and it's normally a few days before Christmas and then a few days after New Year's. Well, here it is January 2nd. We are back in school, so that way we can give kids random Fridays off that nobody asked for, but the teachers enjoy to keep their sanity peppered throughout the school year. But that, we work Christmas Eve, and I recognize a lot of people don't, and I've always wanted my kids to enjoy Christmas at home on Christmas morning, and so we can't travel then. And Brooke and I both have family in Northeast Ohio, and they'd love to see us around the holidays, but I don't really want to spend half my kids' Christmas break at that point riding in a car, so I've been able to get out of it up until this year, and this year we had to go back and we had to visit family, and so we did. And in the process of that, I learned something that was a huge tactical error that I will never do again. And that is, as a result of our travel, we missed trash day after Christmas. Now, I don't know if you recognize what that can do to somebody, but I still have cardboard piled up in my garage as a result of one missed trash day, because it's like we can never catch up. We're always behind. And so I've got all this cardboard, and it's frustrating me, and I'm like, that's it. I'm doing something about it because I've been tackling it in little bits and pieces, and I'm like, I'm just going to go out there like a madman with a utility knife, and I'm just going to cut this cardboard into tiny little pieces, and I'm going to stack those containers like they're a game, and I'm going to fit more cardboard in them than you possibly can. And then I went into my tool bag. Some people have tool chests. I have a tool bag. I went into my tool bag to look for my utility knife, and it wasn't there. And then I have a few, so I went to the other place that I knew the backup would be, and it wasn't there. And I was so gung-ho to go out and just make war against this cardboard, and now I had no utility knife in order to do it, and I'm like, I'm not going to sit out there with scissors. I think scissors might get the job done on some of the cardboard, but I would just feel like a failure. So I refused to do that. So I made a vow, when next time I'm going to go to the store, I'm just going to pick up a couple utility knives. And then I saw an ad, and it was a great ad for 2 utility knives, and I could not believe the price. I could get 2 utility knives for less than what 1 utility knife normally costs. And so I went to the store, and I got those 2 utility knives for less than what one costs, and while I'm there on the display, I see that they have 100 blades, and I'm like, well, what goes well with 2 utility knives but 100 blades? So I picked up the 100 blades. I go and I check everything out, and I'm excited. I drive home like great success. It's the little victories in life sometimes that bring the most joy. And I'm just like, I'm going to go out in that garage and I'm just going to wreck some cardboard. This is going to be exciting. And I go home and I'm like, I'm going to put these utility knives right next to the tool bag. So then next time I'm in the tool bag, just put them in there and then everything's going to be great. And I set them down next to the tool bag, which is still zipped open. And what do I see on top of the tool bag but my utility knife that was in there the entire time? And I know it wasn't just my wife or one of my kids pranking me, because I didn't mention this to them. I didn't mention any of this to them. It was right in front of my face, and I missed it the entire time. I'm like, well, I have 2 bonus utility knives now. And as I'm opening the package, what I realize is those utility knives also came with 50 blades. So I now have 2 extra utility knives and 150 blades. So there is going to be a cardboard cutting party in my garage. And I'm really excited about this. And all of this was right there. Like, it was right in front of my face, and I just missed it. I was distracted. Sometimes in life, we miss things that are right in front of our face. And sometimes it's small things, but sometimes they're incredible things that we miss. We've been journeying through the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to continue that journey today. And what we've been doing is what we're calling the stories. We've been taking selections from each chapter of the Gospel of Mark, and we've been looking at them. And that's what we're going to do again today. So if you have your phones or your tablets, I'd invite you to follow along with us this morning in the Bible app. It's a free resource that you can find in whatever app store you utilize on your device. And once you have the Bible app installed, go to the events feature and either enable your locations or write in Lakeside, Algoma. Will pop up and you can follow along with us that way. If you have a traditional Bible with you, again, we are journeying through the book of Mark, which is the second book in the New Testament, the second gospel. The first is Matthew, and then there's Mark. And if you're joining us via the stream this morning, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Brian. I'm part of the team here at Lakeside. The verses will be available for you on the screen below. If you are stuck and you need some help digging out, let us know. We'll see what we can do about that after the nice 9 inches of snow that we got yesterday. But just to catch you up, because we're going to dive in about halfway through Mark 6. Just to catch you up, what happens in the first part of Mark 6 is that Jesus goes to his hometown. And he's rejected. He's rejected in his hometown. And it's a fascinating scene that unfolds as Jesus goes home and the people reject him. And it leads him to say, a prophet is without honor in his hometown. We're going to pick up in Mark 6:30, where we read these words. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. So let me tell you this. After Jesus was rejected, he looked at the disciples and he said, go out to all the regions around and tell the regions around about the hope of what I am offering, about the hope that I am providing, about the hope that I am. And so the disciples, they disperse and they go and they do that. And then as we talked about in our introduction to the book of Mark, Mark is a very fast-paced author. He jumps from one event to another event to another event, doesn't provide at all times as much detail as the other three gospel writers, and he has a very quick pace in his writing and how he unfolds the story and the ministry of Jesus. And so right on the heels of the disciples going and dispersing and telling people about the hope of Jesus, he then takes us to John the Baptist. Now, you'll remember John the Baptist is the one who prepared the way for Jesus. He was the opener who told everybody the Messiah was coming, repent and believe. John the Baptist was a God-fearing man, and King Herod was involved in some wild things, and John the Baptist confronted him on those, and ultimately King Herod put him to death as a result of that confrontation and a promise that he made to somebody that he was having a sexual relationship with. So that's the first part of Mark chapter 6. So as the disciples return, we get to Mark 6:30, where they return to Jesus and told him, they gave him the report. You sent us out, you told us to disperse, here's what we saw, here's what we accomplished, here's the people that we told. And he said to them, verse 31 says, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. The disciples have just come back from a journey. John the Baptist has just been put to death. Tensions are high. The disciples are tired. And Jesus says, let's get away for a little bit. Let's get away, because everywhere they went, people were swarming them. We've seen this in every chapter of Mark that we've looked at so far within the ministry of Jesus, that everywhere he goes, the crowds are coming because they are hungry to hear him speak. They're hungry for an encounter with Jesus. The disciples proclaiming his message in the different regions. People were swarming them, constantly having to be with people. Jesus says, let's get away for a little bit. Let's go off to a remote place by ourselves. Now, many saw them going and recognized them. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. People continue to follow them. They find out where they're going, and they beat them to the location that they want to go to get away from everything. And Jesus sees this response of people. And he's moved. He's moved to compassion. Because he is the source of hope. And in the midst of so much hopelessness, in the midst of so much despair, in the midst of so much pain, in the midst of needing a Savior, which is a universal human need, Jesus sees the human condition. He sees the longing and the desperation and the hunger. And Jesus remembers he's God. He remembers the initial design. That we were never originally designed to have distance with our Creator. Sin produced that. And so this desperation, this longing, this deep-seated need that is within the crowd is one that should be foreign to the human existence, and yet because of our rebellion and because of sin, this now becomes a defining characteristic of the human existence. And Jesus is moved with compassion. Because he says they're like sheep without a shepherd. Which means they're lost. They're hopeless. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." Now the disciples, they see the crowd. It's getting late. And they're concerned about the crowd. I mean, there's nowhere to eat. There is nowhere for this group of people to eat. So the disciples tell Jesus, let's have them disperse and go get themselves something to eat. I don't know if you've ever been around a large amount of people, around a crowd of people that haven't eaten, but generally people can get hangry. People can, some people have health issues with blood sugar and everything else. It's generally not great if you have a lot of people around who are hungry and haven't eaten for a while. One of the first trips I took as a student pastor was to a Six Flags. And we told every student it was part of a larger week-long trip, and during the course of that week-long trip, some of the meals we were providing and some of the meals the students were on their own for, and we told them that well in advance, and we told them how much to budget, and the Six Flags dinner was one of the meals they were on their own for, and so we told every student as they were getting off the bus and off the vans, we told every student, make sure you eat in the park. This is your dinner tonight. Make sure you eat in the park. This is your dinner tonight. I get back to the bus, make sure everybody's loading on as the night ends. First student, back to the bus. Hey, I didn't eat. Like, awesome. Breakfast is at 7:30 in the morning. You'll be great. Second student, hey, I didn't eat. I'm like, okay, breakfast is at 7:30. Third student, big smile on their face. I ate. I'm like, I always knew I liked you. Fourth student walks on. They ate too because they were in a group together. As the students keep piling up, 92% of them did not eat dinner. I'm like, how could you not eat? And that's when one of my leaders is like, hey, I didn't eat either. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't eat? He's like, well, here's the thing. We were going to the restaurant. The park closed at 10. The restaurant started closing at 7. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. The restaurants were all closed by 8 o'clock. The park didn't close till 10. I'm like, oh, we got a problem. So there I am in the outskirts of Arlington, Texas, in a rented 15-passenger van, trying to find what's open. And there's a McDonald's. And so I drive the 15-passenger van up to McDonald's. I roll down the window, and they said, can we take your order, sir? I said, I need 200 double cheeseburgers and 100 orders of fries. And there's just silence on the other end. And their response I will not repeat to you because we were in church, but they asked if I was kidding them, and I said, I am not. And then there's just silence. And they said, give us 30 minutes. And I said, you got it. Well, in the process of taking our order, it was taking the order in front of them a little bit longer to get their order. And so they had given them their drink and their sauce for their nuggets, but they hadn't given them anything else. So the people took their sauce nugget and chuck it against the window of the McDonald's because they're mad that their order's taken a while. And I'm like, as I'm paying, I'm like, hey, can you give me some napkins so I can wipe your window? Because I just wanted to suck up to him because I felt really bad we had just done this. And so I get all these burgers and all these fries, and I just knock on the hotel rooms and just start chucking burgers and fries at students because we had all of these students who hadn't eaten, and this was a problem. Now, the disciples see that there's this massive group of people that haven't eaten, and it's not like they can just go to the nearest fast food restaurant and cater. They're like, you got to go. You got to go. And by the way, we're in a desolate place, so the one or two restaurants you might find along the way, you send all these people, they're going to be completely overwhelmed. And so Jesus answered them, verse 37 says, but he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? The disciples tell Jesus, hey, these people are hungry. We got to send them away so they can all eat. And Jesus says, you take care of it. And the disciples are like, hey, 200 denarii, that's like 7 months of a salary. We're just supposed to come up with 7 months of pay and buy all this bread? And Jesus said to them, verse 38 says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. So the disciples start asking around, hey, you got any bread? You got any bread? And they find out there are 5 loaves of bread and there's 2 fish. And this massive humanity, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And imagine being the person that has one of those loaves of bread or one of those fish. And the disciples are like, hey, you got any food? I'm like, yeah. I got a loaf of bread. And you're looking around. And the disciples are like, let's have it. I don't know about you, but I'm probably just looking around again. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish. And then Jesus commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all, and they all ate and were satisfied. Jesus groups them strategically into groups of hundreds and into groups of 50s. He prays over the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and they start passing it out, and everybody eats. And it's not like a little nibble. They eat until they are full. But that's not all. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. 12 baskets of leftovers. 12 baskets of leftovers from 5 loaves of bread. 2 fish. 5,000 men, meaning there were that's relative households, meaning there were probably about 20,000 people here. 12 baskets of leftovers. 20,000 people full. 5 loaves of bread. 2 fish. Now, immediately, he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. So Jesus sends the disciples away immediately. The supernatural, the miraculous, this has just occurred. The entire point of where they were coming again was to get away. Everybody rushes there. Jesus does this miracle. He provides for people. Then he sends the disciples away immediately. Well, everybody's still marveling. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. Jesus sends the disciples away. He leaves the crowd behind. He goes on the mountain to pray. I just want to pause and ask, what's your prayer routine or what's your prayer rhythm? I mean, in the midst of the craziness of all that's gone on, and in the midst of just having performed this miracle, Jesus, he then withdraws and he prays. And I don't know what your schedule is like. I don't know what the demands on you are like. I don't know what kind of circumstances or situations you find yourself in life right now. I don't know everything that's going on in your world, but I just question what is your rhythm and what is your routine? Because here in the midst of the miraculous, Jesus withdraws and he prays. And he saw that the disciples were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. So the disciples, they're in the boat. We know what happened the day before, the night before, around dinner time, as evening was setting in. Everyone's miraculously fed. Jesus sends the disciples away. They're in the boat, but they're fighting against the wind, and it's a difficult process. And it's between 3 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the morning. And Jesus is like, I'm just going to walk. Just going to walk on the water over to where they're going and meet them over there. And I'm not sure if they took shifts, and some of them slept earlier in the night. I mean, many of them were fishermen, so they were experienced on the water. I'm not sure if they took shifts and some of them slept after a nice meal where everybody ate till they were full. Some of them were in a food coma, and they're like, hey, you take the first shift, and we'll take others. I'm not sure if they slept right away. We know some of them were sleeping eventually, but I'm not sure what. But anyways, it's 3 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning. You look out, and there's Jesus walking on the water. And they're freaking out because they think it's a ghost. They think it is a ghost, and they are terrified. They're terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and he said, take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. There the disciples are. They are terrified. They are frozen in fear, and the message of Jesus is take heart. Do not fear. Take heart. don't be afraid. Now, here's the question that I want you to wrestle with. If Jesus, as he looked at the crowds, had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, if Jesus cares enough to meet their needs, and to take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and feed 5,000 men, plus women and children, until they were full, to the point that there are 12 baskets of leftovers remaining. If Jesus' message to the disciples is take heart and don't be afraid, as they think they're seeing a ghost and they're terrified, what do you think the message of Jesus is to you when the worries of this world plague your heart? What do you think the message is to you when we have seen God's power and we've seen how he works in ways that are miraculous and that are supernatural? Why do we spend our time worrying on so much that is outside of our control? And then we get to something that I find absolutely fascinating and astounding. And that's verse 52, which says this: "For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." They did not understand about the loaves. So here we are on the boat, as Jesus has just told them, don't be afraid, take heart, it's me. And Mark takes us back to the night before and says they missed it. Jesus already demonstrated what he's capable of. And just hours later, they demonstrated that they completely missed it. Now, if the people who were tasked to go out to the crowd and ask the crowd, hey, you got any food? And they came back with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and they saw Jesus pray over this and miraculously and supernaturally feed 20,000 people and have 12 baskets of leftovers. The day before. And they missed that. What do we miss God doing in our stories and in our lives? If the disciples can be witness to some of the most incredible miracles and miss it a day later, what do we miss? And some of the ways we miss it are this. We stop seeing the crowd the way that Jesus sees the crowd. We don't have the compassion that Jesus has. The crowd is just, it's just become something that we no longer even see. We're like, yeah, they're harassed, they're helpless, they're sheep without a shepherd. It is what it is. And we lose our compassion. We miss it because we're like, well, man, there's 20,000 people here. And I'll tell you, I know I got this loaf of bread from my family and I. But if I was a baker, then I could actually do something. Because what's this one loaf of bread gonna matter? What difference can one loaf of bread make? And we think that about the ways we serve. I don't have some of those gifts. This is the only gift I have. We think about this in the ways that we give. I'm not a millionaire, so I mean, what can God really do with the amount that I could give to Him? Five loaves. 2 fish. Imagine the story you have to tell if one of those loaves were yours. And the reality is, we can all have that story to tell. Because God can take our gifts, God can take our resources, that which we can give, that which we can do. And though it may not seem like much, when we give it to Him, He can do the supernatural. We miss it because we're on to the next day. And we're on to the next thing, and we're on to the next challenge, and that becomes our focus. And the ways that used to just blow our minds, how God has worked in our stories and in our lives, we grow numb to. It's just like, oh yeah, that happened. Here's what I know. There's going to be wind, there's going to be waves, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be obstacles. There are going to be things that terrify you. The equivalent of you thinking you're seeing a ghost out in the middle of the water that's coming for you. These things are going to happen. These things are very real. And when they happen, remember how God has worked in your story. Remember that it's not always huge things. But 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish fed 20,000 with 12 baskets of leftovers. And the people who were on the front line of the miraculous missed it. Let's make sure that we don't miss how God wants to work in our context and in our story. Jesus, thank you for doing the supernatural, for doing the miraculous. Thanks for your love and compassion for us all. And I pray that we would model the compassion that you have extended to us, to the culture around us, to our society. God, I pray that we would be willing to give you the loaf, the fish. And when we look around and we're like, God, I don't know what difference this is going to make in the midst of all of this, I pray we'd give it anyways. And I pray we wouldn't miss how you work. That our hearts wouldn't be hardened. We would never lose sight of all that you've done. Shape us and change us, Jesus, for your glory. It's in your name we pray.